All right, so we're diving into this question you sent over. Do children owe their parents anything? It's a question that has sparked, I think, debates for centuries. And, unpacking all these articles and research and even personal stories you've given us,
Yeah.
it's clear there are no easy answers here.
Definitely not a topic that touches on everything from cultural norms and moral philosophy
Mm.
to like individual experiences
Mm.
and, the family dynamics that are at play.
It feels like even defining, oh, what that even means in this context is a challenge in itself.
Right.
Is it purely financial support,
Yep.
emotional care, respect, or some kind of like tangled combination?
Yeah. The sources you shared, I think, really highlight that, the meaning of "oh" like shifts depending on whether we're looking at moral obligations, so what we personally believe is right,
Hmm.
versus societal expectations, which can vary so drastically, across cultures.
Yeah.
One study actually found that in societies with, strong filial piety traditions, adult children providing financial support to their parents was seen as a primary obligation, even above like their own spouses or children.
Wow.
So it really makes you consider how much our cultural background shapes our views on this.
That's such a striking example, and it challenges the idea that these feelings of obligation are purely innate. Like, it makes me think of that classic nature versus nurture debate. If parents chose to have children do those children, then like enter the world with a debt that they need to repay.
Right, and some of the philosophical arguments you've included really dig into this. Like one philosopher argues that viewing parental love as purely transactional, sort of like, I gave you life so you owe me, actually undermines the very foundation of a healthy parent-child relationship.
It's interesting because some of the psychological research you included touches on a similar idea. Studies have shown that children raised with what they call conditional love affection, that's given only when certain expectations are met, often struggle with self-esteem and forming secure attachments later in life.
Exactly. And that kind of links back to the idea of the guilt trap that
Yeah.
some parents, especially those with narcissistic tendencies, might use.
Right.
The message becomes, I sacrificed so much for you, so you owe me your obedience, your success, even your financial support in my old age.
And those personal stories from people who have experienced this type of manipulation are truly heartbreaking. It highlights the immense emotional weight this topic carries,
Right.
even before we factor in cultural or societal pressures.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, even if we accept that there might be some level of natural obligation towards our parents, what happens when those parents were abusive or neglectful or caused significant harm? Does the slate get wiped clean?
That's where things get incredibly complicated. Several sources delve into the psychological toll of dealing with what they call toxic parents. Some argue that prioritizing self-preservation and like breaking free from those relationships is essential for healing and building a healthy future.
And therapy is often crucial in those situations. It can help process the trauma, establish boundaries, and ultimately decide what kind of relationship, if any, is possible with those parents. One therapist in your notes actually suggests framing the decision not as owing something, but as choosing how much emotional and practical energy one can invest without being re-traumatized.
That reframing is so powerful. It shifts the focus from obligation to self-care and empowerment, but it also brings up that question of cultural expectations again.
Mm.
How do we reconcile individual needs with traditions that emphasize filial piety, especially when those traditions can be so deeply intertwined with religious beliefs or a sense of communal identity?
That's a huge challenge, and there are no easy answers. The sources you've gathered offer perspectives from various cultures, highlighting both the beauty and the potential burdens of those traditions. For example, the concept of filial piety in China has roots in Confucianism and emphasizes, respect, obedience, and providing care for aging parents. It's a deeply ingrained social and moral code that can be a source of great strength and support within families.
But as some sources point out, that same cultural emphasis on filial piety can also be used to manipulate or control adult children, particularly in situations where questioning elders or expressing personal needs is seen as disrespectful.
Right.
It creates this tension between honoring tradition and prioritizing individual well-being.
And that tension can play out in very real practical ways. One of the articles you included discusses how in some cultures, adult children are expected to make significant financial sacrifices to support their aging parents, even if it means jeopardizing their own financial stability or putting their own children's futures at risk. Yeah.
It raises a huge question. Where does the line get drawn? Is there a point where individual well-being supersedes cultural or societal expectations?
And that leads us into another fascinating aspect highlighted in your sources, the legal side of things.
Hmm.
Some countries actually have filial responsibility laws, which legally obligate adult children to financially support their parents.
Wait, legally obligated. So personal choice can be totally overridden by the law in some places. That's a pretty drastic approach.
It is, and it sparks debate about the role of government in these deeply personal matters. Supporters of such laws argue that they protect vulnerable seniors and prevent them from becoming a burden on the state. Critics, however, argue that these laws can be exploited by manipulative parents and can trap adult children in cycles of financial and emotional distress.
So we've got this complex interplay of individual morals, cultural expectations, and even legal frameworks all shaping how we view this question of what we owe our parents. It seems like untangling all of this requires looking at real-world examples, and thankfully the sources you've gathered offer a fascinating range of personal stories.
Yes, and those stories really highlight the emotional roller coaster this topic can take people on. We hear from adult children who feel immense guilt and pressure to care for their parents, even if those parents were emotionally distant or even harmful. Then there are stories of those who find deep fulfillment in caring for their parents, seeing it as a way to express love and gratitude for all they've received.
And what's striking is that even within those seemingly opposite experiences, there's this shared undercurrent of grappling with societal expectations, personal values, and the deep-seated desire to find a right way to navigate this incredibly complex relationship.
It's a reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all answer. Each family dynamic is unique, and the right choice will vary depending on individual circumstances and the nature of the parent-child bond.
So how do we even begin to make sense of all this? Where do we go from here?
I think a good starting point is to shift our focus away from this idea of owing and instead look at the concept of reciprocity. One of the anthropologists you cited argues that healthy parent-child relationships are built on a foundation of mutual care and support that flows in both directions throughout the lifespan.
So it's not about keeping score or tallying up who did what for whom, but rather recognizing that both parents and children contribute to the well-being of the family unit in different ways at different stages of life.
Precisely in childhood,
Yeah.
parents provide for their children's physical and emotional needs as children grow. They begin contributing in different ways,
Yeah.
helping around the house, offering emotional support, and eventually, perhaps even providing financial assistance.
Right.
And as parents age, the roles may shift again, with adult children taking on more caregiving responsibilities.
That framework makes sense, but I imagine it gets messy in real life, especially when you factor in individual personalities and family dynamics. Not all parents are equally supportive or nurturing, and not all children have the capacity or resources to provide extensive care later in life.
Absolutely, and that's why it's so crucial to consider the specific circumstances of each situation. One of the psychologists you included makes the point that the decision of how to care for aging parents should be based on a careful assessment of needs, resources, and potential risks to both parties.
It's like a cost-benefit analysis, but not just in terms of finances, but also emotional well-being and even physical health.
Exactly. For example, if an aging parent requires 24/7 care and an adult child is working full-time and raising their own family, placing that parent in a care facility might be the most practical and ultimately beneficial choice for everyone involved, even if it goes against traditional expectations or causes some feelings of guilt.
But how do we navigate those feelings of guilt, especially when they're amplified by cultural or religious pressures? Some of the personal accounts you shared really highlight how difficult it can be to balance personal needs with the expectations of family and community.
It's a tough situation, and it often requires open communication and setting clear boundaries. One therapist in your notes suggests that having honest conversations with siblings and other family members about everyone's limitations and expectations can help distribute responsibilities more fairly and prevent resentment from building up.
And if those conversations are met with resistance or judgment, perhaps seeking guidance from a therapist or counselor could be helpful in navigating those tricky family dynamics.
Definitely. Therapy can provide a safe space to explore those feelings of guilt, resentment, and obligation without judgment. It can also help individuals develop strategies for setting boundaries and communicating their needs more effectively.
It seems like a lot of this boils down to communication, both within the family and within ourselves. We need to be able to honestly assess our own capacity to provide care, communicate our limitations clearly, and seek support when needed.
And we also need to be mindful of our own motivations. Are we acting out of genuine love and care, or are we driven by guilt, fear of judgment, or a sense of obligation that might be rooted more in societal pressure than in our own personal values?
That's a tough question to ask ourselves, but it seems crucial to untangling this whole issue. It makes me think about the contrasting parental perspectives highlighted in some of these sources we hear from parents who express a sense of entitlement to their children's support, almost as a form of payback for all they've sacrificed.
And then there are those who emphasize the importance of giving freely without expecting anything in return, recognizing that true love doesn't come with strings attached.
It's almost like two different philosophies of parenting with very different implications for how the parent-child relationship evolves over time.
And those different philosophies can create very different emotional climates within families. One study in your notes found that adult children whose parents expressed gratitude and appreciation for their support were significantly more likely to experience the caregiving role as rewarding and fulfilling, even if it involves significant sacrifice.
That makes sense. It's like a positive feedback loop. When parents express appreciation, it reinforces the child's sense of agency and validates their efforts, making them feel more valued and connected.
Exactly. And conversely, when parents express entitlement or resentment, it can lead to feelings of guilt, obligation, and even resentment in the adult child, potentially creating a strained and even toxic dynamic.
So, how do we break out of those negative cycles? What can adult children do if they find themselves trapped in a relationship with a parent who constantly guilt trips them or makes them feel obligated?
Well, as we've discussed, therapy can be incredibly helpful in these situations. It can provide tools for setting boundaries, communicating more assertively, and even detaching emotionally from manipulative behaviors.
And what about the parents? Can anything be done to shift their perspective or help them develop a more healthy and appreciative approach to receiving support from their adult children?
That's a tougher question. And it largely depends on the individual parent's willingness to examine their own behaviors and motivations. One of the books you included suggests that family therapy can be beneficial in some cases, providing a neutral space for all parties to express their needs and expectations.
But ultimately, it seems like a lot of this comes down to individual choices and the dynamics that have been established within the family over many years.
Yes, and it's important to acknowledge that there may be situations where, despite everyone's best efforts, a healthy and balanced relationship simply isn't possible.
And in those cases, sometimes the most compassionate choice is to create distance or even sever ties completely, especially if the relationship is causing significant harm to one or both parties.
That's a difficult decision, and it often comes with a lot of emotional baggage. But it's important to remember that self-preservation is not selfish. It's about prioritizing well-being and creating a life that is both fulfilling and sustainable.
So, as we delve into these personal stories, it's important to keep in mind that there's no single right answer, no universal formula for how to navigate this complex terrain of filial duty and parental care.
Exactly. Each story is unique, each family dynamic is different, and the right choices will vary depending on individual circumstances and values.
But what we can take away from these stories are valuable insights into the human experience, the challenges of balancing individual needs with societal expectations, and the profound impact that our relationships with our parents have on our lives, both for better and for worse.
And perhaps the most important message is this. Whether we choose to provide extensive care for our aging parents, set firm boundaries, or even walk away completely, our decision should be guided by compassion, honesty, and a deep respect for both our own well-being and the complexities of the human experience.
I love that compassion, honesty, and respect. Those are powerful guiding principles as we navigate this challenging and often emotionally charged terrain.
And it's a journey, not a destination. The dynamics of our relationships with our parents are constantly evolving and will likely face new challenges and dilemmas at each stage of life.
So, what can our listener who provided all of this source material for us do moving forward? What advice or insights can we offer based on all we've discussed? It feels like we've covered so much ground, from cultural norms and philosophical arguments to psychological insights and those real life stories, all shedding light on this age-old question of what we owe our parents.
Yeah.
As we wrap up, is there like a single thread, a key takeaway that we can offer our listener as they grapple with their own unique situation?
I think the most important takeaway is this. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. No universal formula for navigating the complexities of filial duty. What matters most is finding a path that aligns with your personal values, your emotional well-being, and the specific dynamics of your relationship with your parents.
So it's less about adhering to like rigid societal expectations or cultural scripts and more about making conscious, informed choices that honor both your own needs and the complexities of the situation.
Exactly. One of the things that really struck me in the source material was the emphasis on open communication and boundary setting. Regardless of, your cultural background or personal beliefs, Having honest conversations with your parents about your limitations, expectations, and emotional needs is crucial.
It sounds like these conversations can be incredibly challenging, especially if you know they're navigating long-standing family patterns or cultural taboos around questioning elders.
Absolutely. And that's where seeking support from a therapist or counselor can be invaluable. They can provide guidance on how to approach these conversations, effectively navigate potential conflicts, and develop strategies for setting healthy boundaries.
One of the therapists in your notes mentioned that framing these conversations in terms of choices rather than obligations can be helpful. It shifts the focus from a sense of duty to a more empowered sense of agency.
Yes, and it allows for a more nuanced approach. It recognizes that while we may have, certain responsibilities towards our parents, we also have the right to prioritize our own well-being and make choices that align with our values and capabilities.
So it's about finding that balance, that middle ground where we can honor our parents without sacrificing our own happiness or compromising our own lives.
Precisely, and that balance will look different for everyone. For some, it might involve providing, extensive care and support. For others, it might mean setting firm boundaries or even creating distance.
It seems like a key part of this process is letting go of the guilt and self-judgment that often accompanies these difficult decisions.
Absolutely. It's important to remember that we are not solely responsible for our parents' happiness or well-being. We can offer support and care within our own limitations, but we cannot and should not be expected to sacrifice our own lives or compromise our own mental health to fulfill their needs.
And sometimes the most loving and compassionate choice might be to step back or create distance, especially if the relationship is causing significant harm.
Exactly, and that's okay. Prioritizing self-preservation is not selfish. It's essential for building a healthy and sustainable life.
This has been such an enlightening deep dive. We've explored cultural perspectives, philosophical arguments, psychological insights, and real-life stories, all shedding light on this age-old question of what we owe our parents. As we wrap up, what final thought would you leave our listener with as they continue to navigate this complex terrain?
I would encourage our listener to approach this journey with compassion, both of themselves and for their parents. Recognize that there are no easy answers, no right or wrong paths. What matters most is finding a way forward that honors your own truth, your own values, and the unique complexities of your family story.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much for guiding us through this intricate and thought-provoking discussion.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has provided you with valuable insights and perhaps even sparked some meaningful conversations. Remember, you're not alone in this journey. There are resources available, whether it's through therapy support groups or even connecting with others who are navigating similar challenges.
And remember to be kind to yourself. This is a complex issue with no easy answers. Trust your intuition, honor your needs, and continue to explore what feels right for you.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the complexities of life.